Talking God with Uncle Luke. This week, hells, angels, losers, and maybe not in that order. Come on in, let's check it out. We got Acts chapter 11, verse 19, the whole way to the end of chapter 12.
All the bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind.
Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad somebody is showing up. It's where Bubba and the word biblical meet up, and everybody's a Bubba in our world. We just simply want to get people reading their Bibles, saying their prayers, getting together, talking God. It's just that simple. There's no tricks up our sleeves. We just think that when people start talking God, well, they have a lot of fun and they ring the chamois of life out better than anybody else on the planet. So this is my attempt to help my brothers and sisters of, well, the Bubba world. So anyhow, we're just trying to get together, talk God, and that means moving away from the bullshit to the holy shit so that we can shoot the shit and kind of sound like we know our shit. But at the end of the day, we just want to rejoice always, pray continually, and give thanks in all circumstances, because that is actually, my friends, God's will for your life. All right, Uncle Luke is kicking the ball down the road in his story, and Uncle Luke is a great storyteller. I haven't said it for a while, but Acts is the second volume to Uncle Luke, who is, out of the apostolic gang, gaggle of people that we tip our hat to and say thank you for bringing all of these great stories to us. And Uncle Luke is a master storyteller. So when Uncle Luke is advancing the story, he is really showing us how and what steps happened in order for God to continue through the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus Christ, the Spirit of the Father, to continue to get the word out. And this passage shows us how, it is God's intention to bring his blessing of Jesus Christ to the world, everybody. And so Uncle Luke now takes us to Antioch in his story, and then he brings us back to Antioch. And that's kind of how we know that Uncle Luke has just told a section of story that hangs together. It starts in Antioch and then comes back to Antioch. Well, and then we're going to return to Antioch. But anywho, that's what marks off our sections. So when you're thinking Antioch, Cyprus, Phoenicia, think of the coastline in the Middle East. Think Aleppo. Antioch would be modern-day Aleppo or close to it. That Syria-Turkey border that's been so controversial. If any of you watch some of the modern day battles that have taken place. Some movies have actually been made about some of those battles and events happening in Aleppo. And, it is a crazy place. But yeah, think Syria and Turkey. That's where our story is taking place. And I think that's just a great reminder just to say that Christianity is the original Middle Eastern religion. Well, that's not true, because the Jews were the original true Middle Eastern religion that really took off and still are here today. So anybody else that comes after that is kind of, relying, and I won't name names. I'm just saying, those who come after Christianity, i.e. other people saying they're prophets, that kind of thing, they can't, they have no historical reach backwards. They're totally dependent on the Jews and the Christians for, where they start in their material, and then they mess it all up. And that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get the story right, baby. But the story takes place in what we call the most controversial area of the world, the Middle East. That is Christianity. People who say that Christianity is a white man's religion, those are the dumbest people on the planet. Christianity, I guess you call it brown people, olive-skinned people. I don't know. Sounds dumb to me when you start talking about it. But that's where our storyline has taken place. Phoenicia is the whole coast of the Middle East, and Cyprus is that big, giant, fatty island, there close to the shoreline of the Middle Eastern shoreline. Well, we got our geography lesson for the day. But anyhow, God is going to actually use, as we're told in the story, we start off in chapter 11, verse 19, that, people have been scattered because of the killing of Steve, which means, people say, hey, man, the kitchen is getting awfully hot. We're out of here. And that is exactly, why God allowed Steve to be killed. And remember, Steve didn't have no complaints about God being unfair. He just said, man, this world's crazy. Forgive them, Lord, for they do not know what they do. Sounded exactly like Jesus intentionally. He's a Jesus guy. This is what Jesus does to people. He actually encourages them and brings them full of courage to a point where if it's time to die, it's time to die. It's not like Steve wanted to die, but God allows Steve to die. But now we can see the purpose of Steve's death is to get people out of Jerusalem, out of Judea, to start spreading out. And that's kind of where really the heart and soul of the story is, that, the people, the Christians that had spread up to Antioch were really just focused on the Jews first. But now, because of what happened to God's beautiful losers, Saul and Peter, the news is out there that the Greek speakers are now the object of God's affection. And remember, speaking Greek was really just the trade language of the Roman Empire. So whatever language mom and dad taught you, if you were going to be successful in the Roman Empire, you had to get away from your homegrown language and be able to speak Greek. So most of the men who did business and transacted trade of any kind, even simple men, fishermen, knew Greek because it was the business language of the day. The Romans, had their Latin that they could, use on their own everybody had their own homegrown language, but they used Greek as the trade language. And that, that bids well. That's what we mean by, that's what Uncle Luke means when he said, the Greeks also. It's not people from Greece. These are people who speak Greek. And so the preaching, was at first just to the Jews, but now all of a sudden with what information God gives Peter and what information God gives Saul, now people are starting to understand, oh baby, this message is going to the ends of the earth, just like God had wanted. So God uses the killing of Steve to get his gang on the move. And also remember that migration is actually God's idea, from the very beginning. Human beings have on the move, and that's a good thing. I'm a Pikey at heart. My tribe hails from somewhere back in Ireland, and who knows where they came from, probably Africa before that. But anyhow, I'm a Pikey at heart. We have been a traveling nomad of a family. We're now finally kind of settled, and I think we're just going to stay put for a while. But, the first 50 years, we're all traveling all over the place. And, migration is the heart of the issue, because as people go, they spread their ideas. And that's what God is using these migrations for. The killing of Steve, says, it calls people to say, we're out of here. We're going to head to different places. But when they arrive at different places, they say, hey, let me tell you about Jesus Christ. And they started just by telling the Jews. Now they're telling Greeks too. And so anyhow, this is kind of, this is what Uncle Luke is doing. He's showing this is how God, continued to pull the reins. And he's now going to use his two losers. So like I said, hell's angels, losers, not necessarily in that order. We're going to do losers first here, but really it is about, the losers of Saul and Peter, this whole passage, this, kind of fun-loving passage, because, what happens in Antioch, is now alarms the folks down in Jerusalem. They tell Barnabas, they're like, get up there and check it out, man. Let's see what's going on. Barnabas comes back and reports that, hey, yeah, the Greeks are now receiving Christ. And they're like, holy Toledo. And Barnabas then says, hey, I got a man. You remember Saul, the one that was killing all of us? I got him up in Tarsus, but that's where he's from. So I'm going to go up and get old Saul from Tarsus, and I'm going to have him come down and start helping. Another interesting fact is that we're told that, a year has gone by, but, there's some other pieces of evidence that tell us that, while there might have been a year, in this part of the story, there might have been about, 10 to 17 years that Saul kind of went back home to Tarsus to really get to, working out how Jesus Christ fulfilled the old part of the Bible, the scriptures, and remember, Peter is the blue collar, salt to the earth loser type. He's the country guy. and Saul is the educated city slicker, and so both characters are going to shape what God is trying to do, because God's message is for everybody. It's for the country guy like Peter. It's for the city slicker like Saul. And Saul is super educated, but now he has to put together, what he thought was impossible, and that is that Jesus Christ fulfills the Old Testament. Now he knows that he does, and now he's going to go back and reread the whole Old Testament, and it seems like he spent a lot of time. This is the place where Barnabas says, hey, I'm going to go get Saul, and I'm going to get him involved in speaking to the Greeks, because God said specifically to Saul, I am choosing you so that we can get this message out to the Gentiles. He also picked Peter. That whole episode with Peter last week was about getting Peter to understand that the message of Jesus Christ has to get to the Gentiles. Okay, well, that kind of, Uncle Luke's just telling a great story, telling us how things actually happened in actual history. And that's the other thing about Christianity, is that the scene and the setting and the storyline all takes place in reality, a reality that we know is a reality. And it's a very consistent reality with other people's realities. This is no story that's just born out of somebody's creativity like Harry Potter. No, this is a story that is born out of reality. And it brings us to a place where we've got to decide, do we trust this reality, or are we trusting some different reality? That's really what it comes down to. At the end of it all, I just don't think Peter, James, John, the mother of Jesus, I don't think they were BSing us. I don't think they were pulling our chain. I think they told us exactly how it went. One of the things that I love about it is that they don't pump themselves out. They allow themselves to be seen by us and understood by us exactly how they were. Losers. Saul was a loser because he was persecuting, the church, and he was murderous. Peter is just an average guy bumbling through all of this, and he's, and he is always our first love, especially if you're a country guy like me. And Peter and Saul just remind me of that Hank Williams Jr. song, Country Boy Can't Survive, because Country Boy Can't Survive is about, a country guy that has a friend in the city, and his friend in the city is killed by a mugger, and that's frustrating. No, I guess the song's about more than that, but it's the reality that country and city can come together and work together, especially under the banner of Christ. Well, anyhow, the scene kind of ends here in Acts chapter 11, verse 27, with a guy coming onto the scene, and he said, "There's a big drought coming. I got word. This is a genuine future-telling kind of thing, that there's a big drought coming." And the people in Antioch, the Christians in Antioch, the Greek speakers in Antioch, they rise to the occasion. They say, we want to help because the people in Judea are going to get hit the worst. And so they raise money and actually get involved in sending gifts down to those people. The true mark of inclusion, which Christianity is the standout. Christianity is really the only inclusive philosophy, religion, whatever you want to call it. It's always inclusive. Everybody is welcome. Come on in. The water is nice. But the true mark of being included is being helpful. And so here the Gentiles are helping the Jews. And that is just the thumbprint of God on their lives. That is the thumbprint of the Spirit of Jesus, the Spirit of the Father at work in their lives, is to, come into the group and then become helpful in the group. So I don't know, I hear a lot of people that get frustrated by the church and then they stop going. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute, that's not the Spirit of Christ in you. The Spirit of Christ in you is to figure out how to make things better, not to, you know what I'm trying to say. Anyhow, the scene moves on. Let's move on. And because Uncle Luke is going to move us on, and we're going to move from the losers to the hells. And truly, hells break loose. The hells that break loose are really surrounding Herod. Herod is just being a good politician. He is keeping the Pax Romana thing going. And historically, we, should understand that the Jews had a very interesting spot with Rome. For Rome, they kicked everybody's butt and they said, listen, you can keep your religion, but you have to accept ours too. So you have to add ours into yours, and we'll add yours into ours. That was Rome's idea of Pax Romana. The Jews said, we won't do that. But the Jews also said, but we can play nice. And oddly enough, Rome went along with that. They gave the Jews the exclusive right to not include the Roman religion in theirs and to keep theirs exclusively. Okay. So the Jews had become extremely politically minded. Jesus is the one who was the thorn in their side initially, and Christianity is just going to continue to be a thorn in the Jews' side because the Jews are mindful at this point, especially Jews like Herod. He's a politician and he's just doing what politicians do. They're keeping the peace, and they don't care who's right or wrong, and they don't care about religion. They just want to keep their spot with Rome. And so Herod sees that the Christians are disrupting the peace, so to speak, in the Jewish communities. And if the peace in the Jewish community starts getting disrupted too much, well, then that is not going to go well with, their relation, Herod's relationship with Rome. So Herod just tries to get control of the situation, and he kills one of the good guys. He kills, one of the sons of thunder, for Pete's sakes. Well, not for Pete's sakes, but he kills one of the sons of thunder, James, brother of John, that guy. Well, he had James put to death. Well, anyhow, that also helps us to see something that probably the modern world needs to hear, and that is that God does allow good people to be put to death. We saw that Steve was put to death, but God is going to use the death of Steve for his good purposes. And remember, God's not afraid of us dying. We're afraid of dying. God's not afraid of us dying. He understands why we're afraid of dying. There's no problem there. But God's the only honest one in the room. We're all the ones who, bend over backwards to, say ridiculous things. But it is biblically clear from front to back, in this book that God put together, that there are going to be those good guys that will die because the world is wicked. The world is characterized by sin. The world is characterized by rebelling against God and not being in tune with God. And so therefore it's just going to keep happening. God is, very, very patient, with us. And so, we see that God does allow James to be put to death, but in the storyline, God is going to spare Peter from the same fate. And neither man goes around boo-hooing saying that God is unfair. So that's the spotlight. Neither of these guys think that God is unfair. Both of these guys know that the just or the good guys will die. And for all the wrong reasons, because of the way this world works. That's the message of the Bible. God is being incredibly honest. The rest of the world is just being a bunch of bullshitters. And we got to get away from the bullshit to the holy shit so that we can know our shit. And how that goes. So the story starts breaking into the story of Peter, and the story starts taking on. So these hells break loose, but the story's going to get really funny because Peter's going to get broken loose. And when Peter gets broken loose, he gets broken loose because an angel comes onto the scene. And so now we're ready to talk angels. So angels are now the focus, on angel, whatever the case is, it doesn't matter. But angel gets put into, Peter gets put into prison because Herod's going to kill him too. And God says, okay, Herod, that's enough. No, that's not going to happen. So once again, God is putting his finger on the scales and getting his way. And anytime God wants to do that, he'll do that. And that's cool. And sometimes he does it when we want, and sometimes he doesn't do it, when we want. Just the facts of the matter, he's still good. He's still great. He's still awesome. And it's us who need to be less afraid of dying. God's certainly not afraid of our dying. So Peter gets thrown in prison, and it looks like he's going to die. However, the angel that God sends has a different idea. So an angel comes into Peter's life. What I love about this story that Uncle Luke tells is that Peter's Peter, man. And we're told this. Peter followed this angel out of prison, did what he said, but he really had no idea what was going on and really what was happening. He thought maybe he was seeing a vision, which is fair, right? Because if you're living in this world where God is interrupting your life and giving you these fantastic visions at times, and you have seen things, think of the things that Peter has seen in his life with Jesus Christ, right? Think about that. It is normative that Peter, in this situation where an angel is literally saving him, would say to himself, I think this is probably one of those visions, you know. I find that incredibly touching. I think it's just great. It's so honest, right? And then we're told in Acts chapter 12, verse 11, Peter came to himself, came to himself, and he says, wow, now I know that I really was delivered by an angel. It wasn't a dream. Again, it's just raw, honest, and it's humorous. While the hells are breaking loose, and Herod's just being a politician like people do, keeping Pax Romana, and killing, one of the innocents, one of the good guys, God spares Peter in this hilarious episode where, Peter's Peter, man. He'll always be Peter, and he allows us to have fun with seeing how his thinking was. I just find that to be endearing. That warms me in, that sucks me in and tells me, that Peter's not full of himself. He allows me to see that, at every step of the way, he was, always just an average guy, an average loser. And so, well, it's just fun. So anyhow, Peter escapes, and then the story gets even funner. And once, again, I remind everybody, humor is on every page of the Bible if you have a sense of humor and if you read it right. If you don't have a sense of humor and you don't read the Bible right, you'll rarely come away with the humor that the Bible gives us at every twist and every turn. So now Peter, kind of stumbles his way, to Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark. And so this is going to introduce another John into the scene. John Mark is what we call him. He'll later become a traveling companion with Saul, and then they'll get in a little spat, and he'll go off with Barnabas. But anyhow, this kind of brings John Mark into the storyline. Peter stumbles his way to Mary, who is the mother of John Mark, and he's standing outside the door, and the scene is just absolutely funny because, they're inside praying for Peter. Peter ends up on the outside of the door, knocking, saying, hey, it's Peter. And then the girl who comes out, Rhoda, the servant Rhoda comes out to the door, and she hears Peter's voice, and she's like, it can't be Peter. So she leaves Peter knocking at the door and goes running back to tell the others, there's some guy named Peter out front, and then they open the door. Peter's like, what the heck took you so long, man? And they're just, it's just, I don't know how you can get any funnier than that. That is the substance of a life funny story, right? There's Peter standing outside saying, please let me in. They're praying that Peter would be released from prison, but they don't believe it's Peter outside. Oh, come on, man. Get a sense of humor. This is good stuff. And God gives us the good stuff. And that's why we're here at the Biblical Channel, Well, anyhow, the scene here kind of ends with somebody's getting frustrated because Herod's on the search for Peter and he can't find him. And so he puts the guards who are in charge of Peter to death. Don't worry about those guards. God is fair. He's good. When you meet your maker, you just came to the best God and the only God that there is. So anyhow, we don't have to be concerned about those guards. But now the scene shifts towards this Herod. And Herod is going to get his due. Herod just pushes the envelope too much here. And so we hear that Herod, is now kind of on a quest to, kind of settle the area that is now starting to rile up a little bit. And all of this matches up with Josephus's history of how Herod would end up dying. This story isn't exactly the same as Josephus's, and Josephus is not a Christian. He's just telling a story of how the Jews in Rome interacted with one another. But his story and this story, they jive with one another. They're just told from a different point of view. But Herod ends up in a public gathering, which Josephus tells us is, at one of the games per se. And Herod has a big speech for everybody saying, calm down, calm down. He's trying to, get everybody to come over. And the crowd wants peace too. And so the crowd says, oh, you are like a god, not a man. And Herod accepts that. And he's like, yeah, now we're talking. Now we're talking. And you know what God does? God says, Herod, that's enough of that. And Uncle Luke tells us God went ahead and struck him down. He was eaten by worms and died, which Josephus tells us that Herod at one of these games, makes a big speech. The crowd loves him. And then he goes back, he sits down. He's like, man, I don't feel good. And days later, he dies of some sort of intestinal disease. That's just funny. And it's historical. There it is. The key here is the word of God continued to spread and flourish. The beat goes on. God's beat is going on. The word is getting out. The Gentiles, the Jews, the gospel is getting out to the ends of the earth. You can kill a Christian, but you can't kill Christianity. And that still is true today. It kind of reminds me of when you see Christians being killed, it's kind of like watching wasps kill bees. And when wasps kill bees, for most of the world, they just see a bunch of stinging going on because wasps, are kind of the archenemy of the bees. But a deeper look sees that this isn't just a bunch of stinging going on, but when the wasps gather around to kill the bees, what they're killing is the one who makes sweetness for the world. What the wasps are killing when they kill a bee is the one who makes, takes from beautiful flowers to make beautiful fruit and to bring us this sweetness, the sweeteners that we all enjoy. And so that's why I got my Don't Tread on Bee. Those guys over at the Babylon Bee, if you're not listening to them, just start. Get the app, look up the website, the Babylon Bee. These guys are Christians and they are funny. And they have the best sense of humor out there. I also recommend The Chosen because they got a great line on helping us to visualize the text. Look up the text that The Chosen, scenes are using and then follow The Chosen. It's just so helpful and it's so good. But anyhow, the scene ends with Barnabas and Saul heading, returning from Jerusalem. And they now have John Mark with them, and the word of God continues to spread and flourish. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're a Christian, you're part of the best movement on the planet, and God calls us to bring the sweetness to everything. But the truth is that there's going to be wasps always around us that are trying to kill us. I remember my wife and I were racing our race car, and a guy come up to me, one of the instructors came up to me, and he said, your shirt, I've been looking at your shirt all day. You must be fond of bees. And I said, no, this is a Christian group of funny guys. And you could just see the look. He was so anxious to talk to me about bees. But then as soon as I started talking about Christianity, he couldn't get away fast enough. And I suppose if he had a bunch of his buddies, they would have attacked me like the wasp. I don't know. But you know what I'm saying? That's the way the world works. And the Bible brings us to the sweetest stuff and to be the sweetest stuff on the planet. Praise God for that. That's where we're going to end. Catch you next time.